Folks, I want to introduce you to the Federal Affairs Manager over at FreedomWorks. His name is Daniel Savickas, and he joins us now on the phone. Daniel, how are you, sir? Good morning.
It's good to be with you.
Really glad that you could spend some time with us this morning, and I'm just curious, this Trump tariff Mexico talk, that sort of thing. What's that going to do? Is it? I hear that there still needs to be more negotiations, and it hasn't actually happened yet, right? The 5% tariff has not been put into effect yet.
Yes, the tariffs have not been put into effect yet. The administration's signaling that they're planning to do it beginning of next week. Hopefully, after some negotiations with the Mexican government, they can come to some sort of agreement where those tariffs don't have to be put into place. But as of right now, there are not the 5% tariffs in place, but possibly early next week if there's no agreement.
So what do you think that means for the country? I mean, it means we're going to be paying more for avocados?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and for a whole host of other products as well that we get from Mexico. And we're already seeing the stock market declining just from the threat of increased tariffs, and farmers across the country have already required billions in aid packages because tariffs are increasing the prices of their goods that they need to run their farm. So hopefully that this is just a negotiating tactic in the short term, and we don't have to actually see the impacts going forward of these tariffs.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody wants no tariffs, but, on every country, just has no tariffs at all. And I think that's what I kind of sense the administration's goal is here. We're here in Arkansas, and you broadcasting, to a lot of farmers, a lot of acreage, if you will. And, our congressmen, our delegates that we send to Washington, D.C., they're very thankful that there are farmers who are willing to suffer in the short term so that in the long term we have access to other markets and, can attempt to reclaim, some sovereignty here. Do you agree with that sentiment? What are your thoughts on that?
I genuinely hope that this is a negotiating tactic to get to zero tariffs. Unfortunately, what I've seen in D.C. and what I've seen the Trump administration say in its public statements does not indicate to me that this is a short-term play. He's called tariffs a beautiful word. He's touted how much revenue has come into the country because of the tariffs that have already been put into place. And the way I'm looking at the stock market's performance in the light of these tariffs, and for a president who's put a lot of stake in the success of the stock market and touted his deregulation and tax cuts, which have been great for the economy, him touting his stock market successes, for him to be willing to let the stock market take a tumble for these tariffs, especially when he's put a lot of his legacy on the performance of the stock market, it gives me pause and consider whether or not this really is a negotiating tactic or whether he thinks that tariffs are the best route to go, and I don't think that's the case.
Interesting. I read an article yesterday where an economist had a theory that, if sometime next year, you get the Fed to drop interest rates, and then at the same time you end the trade wars entirely, all of a sudden the stock market goes to record highs just in time for the 2020 election. And I thought, well, you never know. Maybe that's the play here. Who knows?
I hope you're right. I genuinely do. I would love to see that happen, and I hope my pessimism is misplaced. I'd always love to be wrong on this.
Well, so I mean, in terms of the legal immigration, I mean that's what is, that's what's being presented as, hey, we've got to do something. That seems to be the mentality. We got to do something to get Mexico some skin in the game here, so they start to help out, so they start to prevent this mass invasion that we're seeing. And of course, we know that illegal immigration does cost the state, or cost America financially. through welfare and everything else. Not to mention, I mean, I've interviewed angel moms, I've interviewed angel dads. Not to mention, the loss of life as well. But I mean, I never considered tariffs, being something that you could drop on Mexico to get them to try to stop some of this stuff. And I don't even know. The Mexican government is so corrupt. I don't even know how they would go about getting control of the border.
Yeah, I don't know either. And one of the problems is that I was talking to some people in Washington about this, that putting tariffs on Mexico is certainly one way to go about trying to get them to deal with the migrant problem that they have. On the other hand, economically weakening Mexico, which is what the tariffs would do, and because Mexico's economy is not as strong as the United States, it would probably impact them more quickly than it would the United States. But making Mexico an economically weaker state is actually going to drive more people north, because Mexico would lose jobs. Mexico would start to suffer economically, and more people would look to the United States for jobs, and that could possibly exacerbate the migrant crisis in the short term. And because Trump is facing re-election, and the Mexican government just began recently, about 6 months ago, the President Obrador of Mexico just started his term, he might just have to wait out President Trump, let the U.S. stock market take a tumble, and in the short term, the Mexican government has more time to wait, because they know the Trump administration has an election coming up, and they can't let the stock market go for too much longer.
Interesting. There's so many variables at play here. I had never considered that it might, force more people north. If Mexico's economy, takes a bigger hit. But, then again, like you said, our economy is so much stronger than theirs, and they will feel it. But, can't. So it's kind of a game of chicken. Who's going to blink first? And that's the same thing that's happening with the Chinese, is who's going to blink first. The difference with the Chinese, obviously, they're a much larger economy, and they're building up their military, and I think according to the FBI, they got investigations in all 50 states, intellectual property. Here in Arkansas, there was a couple of I think Chinese nationals last year who were indicted for stealing our rice technology out of Stuttgart, Arkansas. So I mean, that is a completely different bird. But in terms of the country you're dealing with, but something's got to be done. I mean, I think a lot of Americans, they see this as, well, at least he's doing something, in an attempt to try to stop what's been going on, for several decades. And I guess we're just going to have to wait and see what happens, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it works out, and I know a lot of what goes on in Washington is done because people want some sort of action, and people might rush into something. I hope that this negotiation works out well over the weekend and before these tariffs go into place, and I'd like to be able to trust that the Trump administration can get something done, although I don't know if the Mexicans will cooperate or if the Trump administration doesn't want to be seen as bluffing on this threat. I don't know how this all plays out, but I'm certainly hoping for the best.
Yeah. Well, Daniel Savickas, who is the Federal Affairs Manager at FreedomWorks, hey, we appreciate you coming on the program, and it's great to meet you, sir.
Yeah, it was great to meet you, too. Thanks for having me.
All righty. Be safe, folks. We are going to reset here. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back here in just a moment.